Star 22.
This meeting is now being recorded.
Welcome to today's web conference, the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey 2010 to 2012 State Report, Review Findings and Implications for National, State, Territorial, and Tribal Organizations. I'm really pleased with us, Prevent Connect, are working with our other national resource centers, the National Resource Center, National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the United States government, CDC, or CalCASA. I'm really pleased that we have the opportunity to do this in conjunction with other national resource centers. And so we have from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, Jen Grove. How are you doing, Jen?
Hi everyone. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. And we also have from the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, Ann Menard. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann. I'm also glad to be here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we have been working together in helping prepare organizations with the Nisvs release and really want to appreciate the work. And they'll be talking, Jen and Ann will be asking questions and be a resource throughout the web conference. And at the end, we'll share some of the resources that they have available to help support all of your organizations. So we now want to ask a question of you. This got released last week on Tuesday. The Nisvs, we call it Nisvs as an acronym. I usually, but let's get this. It's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, State Report 2010. Have you reviewed that? So we just want to get a sense of our audience. I am not going to ask how many of you read all 280 pages, but have you reviewed the report? So go ahead and on the left-hand corner, there's a little box. And I'm seeing many of you have not voted yet, but this is an audience of people that clearly are concerned and pay attention to what's going on. So I'm going to share the results, and almost 2/3 of you have reviewed it, and 1/3 of you are looking forward to reviewing it soon. That will be my reframe, so thank you very much. That's great to see people's familiarity with this. We did do a web conference for this audience last November that sort of outlined some of the methodology issues and and what was going to be in the report without sharing any of the findings. Meghna will put a link to that recording soon, so if you have other questions about some of the background, we're not going to spend much time in the background today. We'll reference you to that web conference that we had for the same audience of people. Many of you were on that web conference. Our learning objectives for today is we want to describe the key findings of the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey State Report 2010 and be able to identify opportunities to be able to use that data. We really want to create an opportunity to be able to ask questions. And so I'm really pleased that we have today the authors of this report, and I'm really glad from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at the National, the Division of Violence Prevention at the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. So I'm really pleased to be able to have Sharon Smith. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, David.
Hi, and she is joined by her colleagues, Kathleen Basile. Hey, Kathleen.
Hi, David.
And also Melissa Merrick.
Hi there.
Hi, and so in this web conference, we're going to really give a lot of time. We'll create space for questions after some of the major sections. So go ahead and put your questions in there in the text chat as we go on, but we do want to share these findings. So I'm going to do no further ado, and I'm 1 minute early on my introduction. How's that? So I'm going to, Sharon, hand the podium over to you and your colleagues will go ahead and advance the slides. And I will be asking, and Ann and Jen and I will be here to perhaps ask some questions or make some comments as you go along.
Okay, great. Thank you. You can advance slides, right? With the mouse. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Sharon, are you able to advance slides? I just advanced the slide for you.
Okay, I think I figured it out. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're excited that the report's been released, and we're going to share some of the findings with you today. So this is an overview of the topics that we will cover in this webinar. We're going to go over some of the highlights of the data in the report, but not everything. If you've looked at the report, you've seen it's quite lengthy, so we won't have enough time to go through everything. So first, a little bit about Nisvs. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey was funded and launched by CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control in 2010, with support from NIJ and the Department of Defense in 2010. Nisvs is an ongoing, nationally representative, random digit dial telephone survey that assesses experiences of sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence among adult women and men in the U.S., and it provides national and state-level data. The primary objectives of Nisvs are to describe the prevalence and characteristics of sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence, who is most likely to experience these forms of violence, the health conditions and impacts associated with these forms of violence, and finally, to provide national and state estimates. Nisvs was designed with this particular goal in mind. So here's an overview of what is included in the report. We're going to touch upon all of these in this webinar, mainly at a high level. Unfortunately, due to the sample size, we do not have many stable estimates at the state level for race ethnicity, but we do include those at the national level. And in the appendix, we include national estimates for all forms of violence for the 2000 year only, if you're interested in a single year of data. 2012 data, pardon. Okay, first I'm going to go over the methods and sample use for this report very briefly. Data were collected in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Interviews were conducted from January 2010 to December 2012, with a total of just over 41,000 completed interviews over the 3 years. Of those interviews, 22,590 were from women, 18,584 were from men. Nisvs uses a dual-frame sampling strategy that includes both landline and cell phones. 43.3% of the interviews were conducted by landline phone, and 56.7% were by cell phone. The response rate across the 3 years is roughly 33%, but the cooperation rate was over 80%. So this means that once an interviewer was able to speak to someone and establish their eligibility, the person most likely continued with the survey. Because we are using 3 years of data, the data are presented as average annual estimates. So these are estimates that are based on a weighted average of the 3 years of data combined. So stated another way, this is the average annual estimate across all 3 years. This applies to the estimated percent of victims as well as the total number of people who were victimized. Now I'll just give you a few initial points about the state data. In the text of the chapters, you might have seen that we describe this state data using ranges from low to high. In doing so, we've indicated the number of states with reliable estimates and counted the District of Columbia as a state. So this is a total of 51 states. So keep this in mind. If all states in DC have estimates, then this is a total of 51, not 50. And there are instances where the number of reliable states is 50, so this means that all but one state had reliable estimates. If all states had reliable estimates, then we say all states rather than saying 51. This is just for clarity. In cases where relatively few states are available, it was usually the larger states that were reliable. In the report, however, we've included all reliable state estimates, even if there was only one state. Second, we recommend using caution if comparing states. It's important to keep in mind that the prevalence estimates are based on a sample. The estimates that are based on a sample always include some error. This uncertainty or error is estimated with a 95% confidence interval. The confidence interval provides a range of values that likely include the true prevalence estimate. The 95% confidence interval means that we can be 95% confident that the true prevalence is within the interval. So estimates that have overlapping confidence intervals, as you might see in the confidence interval in the tables, those with overlapping intervals might not be meaningfully different from each other and would require additional statistical analyses in order to test for differences. In addition, it's important to remember that there are variations in states in terms of demographics, social, economic, and cultural characteristics, and these could account for the differences in prevalence. Finally, it's important to remember that the state estimates are based on the respondent's current residence, but the lifetime estimates might reflect victimization that occurred earlier in life, or if they were living somewhere else, if they were living in a different state, for example. But state estimates are meaningful because they give a sense of the burden of victimization in a given state.
Okay, so let's go. Thank you, Sharon. Let's just ask our audience a little bit. How do you? This report is because it has, and one of the reasons it's so long is all those levels. We'd love to hear from you. How do you see using state-level data in the work that you would be doing? Nisvs reports in the past have given national data, but as we get some of the state-level data, so I'd love to hear from our audience about how would you see using state-level data. So go ahead and write that in the text chat. And I think, so Sharon already talked about it's a way to be able to identify the burden of victimization within a state. And so how have other people thought about that? And someone said that in grant requests, then you could be able to give some of that specific thing in newsletters, be able to use this in media conversations, in trainings for working with legislature to be able to then help localize and identify what's going on, inform outreach capacity efforts with allied organizations and partners, and we can educate the public, and often that localness is helpful. State health department use this to inform prevention programming for the state, and so being able to do that. This is an interesting question, comparing to other state indicators, because as you're looking at other state data, you can be able to, other state data that's been collected, be able to get a sense of how that operates. For partnering with other agencies and hoping ways to use, someone talked about using state-level BRFIS data, which could help complement this and frame a conversation about chronic disease and looking at the long-term impacts of violence. And you'll be actually seeing in the report the health outcome information that we have, though I don't believe that was state level. Is that state level, Sharon, on the health outcomes?
The health conditions, yes, we do have state level data on those. We
do have state level on the health conditions, so great. So that's also, a lot of people are seeing many values to the state level data. Well, great, Sharon. Why don't we start with sharing the sexual violence data?
Okay, thank you. This is Kathleen, and I'm going to start us off with the data that we have starting with sexual violence. So this slide shows the categories of sexual violence that we included, that are included in Nisvs and that we include in the report. And we wanted to bring to your attention one of the major changes for this report is the inclusion of the category called contact sexual violence, or contact SV for short. So we introduced this category back in the 2011 report, and we've included it more widely here in this state report. You'll see it throughout the sexual violence section. Contact SV includes any type of sexual violence that involves physical contact. So it's all of the types on the slide except the last one, which is non-contact, unwanted sexual experiences. So this is a combination of rape, made to penetrate, sexual coercion, and unwanted sexual contact. One of the reasons we included this more broadly in this state report is we wanted to provide something close to an overall SV estimate because we thought it would be useful to states. And I just want to make sure that you don't confuse this category with the other category on the slide called unwanted sexual contact. That represents non-penetrative acts like fondling and other sexual touching that are non-penetrative. And it's different from the overall contact SV, which is more broad. So we have many more reliable estimates at the state level for lifetime experiences than 12-month experiences due to the sample size, and you'll see that in the next few slides. Okay, so this slide is sexual violence of women in the lifetime. These are national and state level estimates just for women on this slide. And you'll see there in parentheses throughout the slides that we're going to present, we list the number of states with reliable estimates there in parentheses. So for contact SV, that overall number I just described, we see 1 in 3, or 36.3% of women have experienced this in the nation. And I'm not going to read the ranges, but you can see the ranges for states for each of these estimates. For rape, we see 1 in 5 women have experienced this sometime in life. That's the national estimate, 19%. Sexual coercion, 13.2% of women, and that's 1 in 8. Unwanted sexual contact is about 1/4 of women nationally, and non-contact about 1 in 3, or 32% nationally. Okay, this slide is also women, and these are the 12-month prevalence estimates for sexual violence. As you can see here, we have few state estimates for the 12-month. We only have state estimates for contact SV and non-contact unwanted sexual experiences. So you see the national estimates, about 4% of women experienced contact SV in the 12 months before the survey. Rape is about 1.2%, sexual coercion and unwanted sexual contact are both about 2%, and non-contact is about 3 or 3.2% nationally in the last 12 months. Okay, now we're moving to men. We're talking still about sexual violence of men, and this is a lifetime slide. So we see for contact SV, 17% of men experience that at some time in life. That's the national estimate. That's about 1 in 6. For rape, it's 1.5%. That's about 1 in 67 men at some point in life experienced rape. Made to penetrate, for men, it's 5.9% nationally, and that's about 1 in 17 men. Sexual coercion is also about 1 in 17. It's 5.8% nationally. These are lifetime estimates. Unwanted sexual contact, about 11%, and non-contact unwanted sexual experience is 13%. So again, we have more reliable estimates at the state level for lifetime than 12 months due to the sample size. But we do want to say that we have a greater number of estimates for men than we've reported in the past due to the increased sample size of these 3 years combined. So these are the 12-month prevalence estimates for men. And again, similar to women, we only have state estimates for contact SV. In this case, it's 3 states for men. And non-contact unwanted sexual experiences, we have 2 states that are stable for men. You see the estimates here, about 3.7%. This is in the last 12 months. Men experienced contact SV. About 0.2% experienced rape nationally in the last 12 months. Made to penetrate was 1.5%. Sexual coercion, 1.4%. Unwanted sexual contact, 1.7%, and non-contact, 2.6%. Those are 12-month estimates for men. This slide shares national prevalence of contact SV victimization by race ethnicity. This is for women and men, and it includes both lifetime and previous 12 months on this slide. As you can see here, all racial and ethnic groups experienced contact SV, but the burden of victimization was greatest among racial and ethnic minorities, especially multiracial and American Indian Alaska Native persons, as you can see there by the estimates at lifetime for women and men. Okay, moving to the type of perpetrators. This is, and as you can see, we're just giving you a few highlights. There's more data in the report, but this slide is about type of perpetrator of rape among female victims. So looking at female victims, the perpetrators of rape were often someone they knew. As you can see here, most perpetrators were current or former intimate partners. That's 47% of perpetrators among female victims of rape. And the other most common group were acquaintances, 44.9% of female victims of rape reported an acquaintance as a perpetrator. The other SV categories and perpetrator types are included in the report. As you can see, most of the state estimates are for intimate partner and acquaintances, the two most common perpetrators. So you'll see we have 49 states for intimate partner and 46 states for acquaintance, but the other states are not stable. Okay, now this slide is similar, but for men, and this is looking at made to penetrate and the type of perpetrators for made to penetrate among male victims. So among male victims of made to penetrate perpetrators were usually someone they knew. Once again, most perpetrators, similar to women, were current or former intimate partners and acquaintances. So 50%, 50.5% of male victims of made to penetrate reported an intimate partner, and 44% reported an acquaintance. As you can see, we have very little reliable state data for the type of perpetrator for this slide. We have 2 states for intimate partner, and that's it, actually, just intimate partner. And the last slide I'm going to share about the sexual violence data. This is the sex of perpetrators of sexual violence, and this slide just gives a few examples of the sex of perpetrator for different forms of sexual violence. There's more in the state report. At the national level, for female victims, the sex of the perpetrator was overwhelmingly male across all forms of sexual violence. As you can see there, we list rape, sexual coercion, and non-contact experiences. For male victims, the right side of the slide, it was a combination of female and male perpetrators. So for rape, the perpetrators of male victims were usually male. For made to penetrate and sexual coercion, the perpetrators were usually female. And for non-contact unwanted sexual experiences, almost half had only male perpetrators and about a third had only female perpetrators. So there's more information on sex of perpetrator in the report.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathleen. So I want to now take a moment to get questions. There already was a question about the written definitions of contact sexual violence, and we refer to page 17 in the report that has all of the different definitions clearly defined, and I did put in the text chat what the contact one was, but it's just the sum of all these different types. I really appreciate, Kathleen, having this number in the report. I think it really helps us use the data, recognizing that there are different types of abuse with different impacts, so we want to recognize the differences, but also recognize some of the burden of sexual violence. So are there any other questions? Go ahead and put that in the text chat around the sexual violence data. We want to be able to, there is a lot of data here that we can see. You'll be able to look at those charts in depth, but I do want to do this. What are your questions about sexual violence? Oh, Megna was asking the question for you. I was thinking that was a question that someone was asking. I am not seeing any questions about the data, so I do want to get time to get to all the forms. So we'll now move to our stalking data. And who's going to be presenting the stalking data?
This is Sharon. I'm going to be presenting stalking and IPV.
Great, thank you. So Sharon, why don't you take, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll go to stalking data. Well, I'm sorry, we jumped ahead.
Okay, there we go. So the Nisvs definition of stalking is the same as what we've used in previous reports. A person is considered a stalking victim if they experience multiple stalking tactics or a single tactic multiple times, all by the same perpetrator, and they felt very, very fearful or believed that they or someone close to them would be harmed or killed due to the perpetrator's behavior. So as you can see on the slide, we have the whole definition there. So I'm just sort of paraphrasing, that our prevalence estimates are based on this definition, and this is consistent with what we've reported in the past definition is. Okay, this slide shows the lifetime and 12-month estimates of stalking for women and men. As you can see, lifetime prevalence for women is 15.8%, so that's nearly 1 in 6. For men, it's 5.3%, which is about 1 in 19. State level estimates were 9.6 to 24% across all but one state. For men, for women, For men, 2.6 to 6.5 across 15 states. 12-month estimates were about 4% for women and 2% for men. Also wanted to point out that in the 2010 report, within the text, we had included a footnote that described the lifetime and 12-month prevalence using a less conservative definition that includes any level of fear. So in this report, we have included a similar footnote on the pages where the stalking prevalence is discussed in the text, and also in the appendix where we include the individual 2012 tables. Okay, this slide shows stalking victimization by race, ethnicity. All racial ethnic groups experience stalking, but the burden was highest for multiracial and American, Indian, Alaskan Native women, and for multiracial and non-Hispanic Black men. We have some state estimates in the report. And this slide shows stalking tactics that were experienced by female and male victims during their lifetime. The women are in purple, the purple bars, and men are in the light blue. So commonly reported tactics among the victims were receiving unwanted phone calls, voice messages, and text messages, about 76% for women and 72% for men. The perpetrator showing up or approaching them, 59% for women, 47.5% for men. Being watched, followed, or spied on, 44% for women and 31.6% for men. And wanted to highlight the two on the far right, property damage and threats of physical harm. So these data are new to this report. We have not provided those data in the previous reports. So as you can see, nearly 70% of both female and male victims experience threats of physical harm by their stalkers. Okay, in this slide, we show a few examples of some state estimates. State estimates for women are in the light purple, kind of pointing to their corresponding bar, and men are in the light blue. So for watched, followed, spied on for females across 45 states, estimates range from about 27 to 62%. For unwanted messages, females across 48 states, estimates range from 59 to 90%. For males in 5 states, estimates were 66.5 to 86%. Threats of physical harm for females across 48 states, estimates were 49 to 84%, and for males across 5 states, 67 to 93%. So you can see we have greater number of state estimates for women, but we do have some for men. Okay, this slide shows the type of perpetrators of stalking. Women are in purple, men are in light blue. For both women and men, perpetrators were usually someone they knew, mostly intimate partners and acquaintances. 61.5% of female victims, 42.8% of male victims had an intimate partner, his current or former, as a perpetrator, and 26% of female victims and 37% of male victims had an acquaintance perpetrator. And the slide shows a few state estimates. For female victims reporting an intimate partner perpetrator across 48 states, the estimates range from 43 to 77.6%. Also for female victims with an acquaintance perpetrator, state estimates range from about 20 to 42%. For male victims, there was only one reliable state estimate, which was 54.6% for having an acquaintance perpetrator.
So Sharon, there's some questions just on these definitions. So when you're talking about the perpetrator, acquaintance would include someone that would be described as a friend?
Yes.
And what about someone that, now in our terminology, is a friend with benefits? Would that considered a intimate partner or an acquaintance?
It depends on how they reported that.
Yeah, it's sort of open-ended whenever they get the questions, and then we code it on the back end. They don't necessarily say friend with benefits.
Okay, so there might be a range of ways that, depending on how they interpret it, some might have seen it as an intimate partner and some might have become an acquaintance.
Right.
Okay, great. And then thank you, someone already listed the, I love it when people are actually quoting page numbers in their responses. So on page 23, we have acquaintance includes friends, neighbors, family, friends, first date, someone briefly known, and persons not known well. And so, and Deb Seltzer says it would be interesting about coworkers as another category. Would be interesting because that would speak to some of the workplace issues, but that's been aggregated. That would probably be in the acquaintance, that would be in the acquaintance category, or if the person was a superior of them, it would be a person of authority, I would imagine.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Thanks for the questions there to get clarity. Let's move on.
Okay, so this slide shows the sex of the perpetrators of stalking. So during their lifetime, female victims had mostly male perpetrators. 84.8% had only male perpetrators. Male victims had a mix of perpetrators. They were nearly evenly split by having only male perpetrators, which is 43%, and having only female perpetrators, which is 45.7%. And we have state data for these in the report. Okay.
Great. So let's use this opportunity now to get some other. Are there any other questions regarding the stalking data? And so go ahead and write in the text chat if you have any other questions. I do see Lori Hart asked some really good overall methodology questions, but Lori, I'm going to come back to those questions at the end. I think we'll be doing that. Was there any control for self-report bias?
No.
So I'm not
No.
Sharon?
No.
There was not. Okay, any other questions around the stalking data? I know I want to give a moment because I know last time people are thinking about their questions about the stalking data. Okay, I am not seeing any at this moment, so at this stage we're going to move over, and Sharon, you are now going to be talking about the intimate partner violence data. So I'm seeing a question. How are people thinking they'll be using the stalking data for prevention? Leah, we're going to actually get to that question a little bit later about how people are going to use this for their prevention work. So I want to go back to that question. I think it's a really good question, but we'll look at all the forms of data, how we use that for the prevention. But stalking does create an interesting situation. So Sharon, let's go talk about the intimate partner violence.
Okay, so this slide shows the subtypes of IPV that are captured in Nisvs and their definitions. So in our definition of intimate partner violence, we cover sexual violence, stalking, physical violence, and psychological aggression. For a number of the estimates, you'll see that we include contact SV. The definition is repeated up here on this slide. As Kathleen stated earlier, we introduced this combined measure in the 2011 report. The other subtypes are consistent with what we've reported in our previous reports. For the purposes of this state report, we don't include control of reproductive or sexual health. And this table shows the lifetime and 12-month prevalence estimates for women for the various forms of intimate partner violence, starting with the combined measure of contact FV, physical violence, and or stalking. On this slide and others you'll see the numbers in parentheses are the number of states that had stable estimates. They're in that state column. We also include individual estimates for contact SV, physical violence, stalking, and at the bottom, the combined contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking with impact. So looking at that cell, as you can see, about 1 in 4 women, or 27.4%, experienced contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking, and reported at least one IPV-related impact, such as fear, concern for safety, or injury. In a few minutes, I'll talk in more detail about the IPV-related impact. And this is a similar table for men, which includes both lifetime and 12-month estimates of the different forms of IPV. Looking again at the bottom, as you can see, 11%, or about 1 in 9 men, experienced contact SB, physical violence, and or stalking, and reported at least one IPV-related impact. The individual forms are above that cell. Okay, this chart shows the experience of physical violence by an intimate partner by their subcategories. Women are in purple, men are in light blue. To the left, we show the experiences of being slapped, pushed, or shoved. And on the right is severe physical violence. And severe physical violence includes being hurt by pulling hair, hit with a fist or something hard, being kicked, slammed against something, choked or suffocated, being beaten, burned on purpose, and used a knife or gun against them. Looking at severe physical violence, you'll see that 23% of women and 13.9% of men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner at some point in their lifetime. It's only in the prevalence of slapping, pushing, or shoving on the left that we find a fairly similar prevalence estimates for women and men, with 3 in 10 women and 1 in 4 men reporting those forms of physical violence. Please note that in the report we only provide national estimates for these subtypes of physical violence. We do not have state estimates for these. And next, it's psychological aggression. This includes expressive aggression, such as name-calling, and coercive control, which are behaviors intended to monitor and control or threaten an intimate partner. Nearly 50% of women and men have experienced some form of psychological aggression by an intimate partner during their lifetime. 12-month estimates were 14% for women and 18% for men. Within the subtypes, nearly 40% of women experienced expressive aggression and coercive control during their lifetime, and for men, 31% experienced expressive aggression and 41% experienced coercive control. For most states, if you look on this slide, most states had stable lifetime and 12-month estimates for both women and men. And the number of states with stable estimates are shown in parentheses. Okay, race, ethnicity. All racial ethnic groups experienced IPV, but the burden was highest among multiracial, American Indian, Alaska Native, and non-Hispanic Black persons, and this was true for both women and men. And state estimates are shown in the report. Okay, for this slide, some of the points that I'm going to make might sound repetitive, just a little forewarning, but I want to make sure that you understand what goes into these estimates, so just bear with me. So these are statistics that we've already shown just a couple minutes ago, but we wanted to elaborate on these estimates. Given that IPV can range from a single act of violence experienced one time to multiple acts of violence over many years, it's important to measure the impact. In Nisvs, impacts are captured as negative experiences with a specific IPV perpetrator. Some examples of impact are injury, needing services, and having symptoms of PTSD. The impact is helpful in understanding the severity of the violence, and the magnitude of the different types of impacts can be used to focus prevention services and response. So first, a couple of points about the way IPV-related impact is measured in Nisvs. So the impact questions were asked in relation to specific perpetrators without regard to the time period in which they occurred. So this is important to remember. Also, violent acts are often experienced in the context of other violence, all by the same perpetrator. So for example, a victim might have experienced both rape and physical violence by the same intimate partner. For this reason, the impact questions were asked in relation to all forms of violence committed by the perpetrator in that relationship. So we believe this information provides a nuanced understanding of the overall impact of violence.
Yeah. So Sharon, can I just come in, and Ann Menard, I would love your thoughts on, I think this is a very important and useful, very useful piece that is in Nisvs. And Ann, can you just talk about why you see the importance around IPV-related impact data?
Yeah, and I appreciate our CDC colleagues for both collecting this data and keeping the reports of particular types of violence in the context of their impact. One way that I have reflected on this is it makes a difference if you're in a relationship and your partner is pushing and shoving you and you laugh it off, or it doesn't, it's not impacting you. That's very different than the very same acts of pushing and shoving that may be occurring for another victim in the context of, many months or many years of violence. And that same pushing and shoving makes them afraid, happens to have them fall downstairs as a result of the push and shove. So it's that context, it's that impact that really tells us the story of what's going on. So I would say that, and I think that's what we have been talking about as advocates, for the last 30 years is the type of violence that has this range of serious impacts on its victims. And I know the next chart's going to really underscore that, so I'm going to get it, send it back to CDC.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Sharon.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ann. So, no, we're still on those slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead.
All right.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, we just want to talk a little bit more about these estimates. So on this slide, we show estimates of lifetime and 12-month experiences of contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner with impact from these or other forms of IPV in the relationship. So it's important to remind that the impact could have happened at any time during the relationship. And it's also important to include victimization experiences in the last 12 months in addition to lifetime experiences. So these are people who were victimized in the past 12 months by a perpetrator who's caused impact at some point in that relationship. So for women in the U.S., 27.4% experienced contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking in their lifetime and experienced at least one impact at some point in their life from this or other forms of IPV in the relationship. State estimates range from 19.7 to 35.3. 4.7% of women nationally experienced contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in the last 12 months and experienced at least one impact at some time in their life from those or other forms of IPV in the relationship. And state estimates range from 3.2 to 8.2% across 13 states. For men, in the U.S., 11% experienced contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking in their lifetime and experienced at least one impact at some point in their life from this or other forms of IPV in the relationship. State estimates range from 6.3 to 16.4% across 48 states. And finally, 2.2% of men experienced contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in the last 12 months and experienced at least one impact at some time in their life from this or other forms of IPV in the relationship. However, the 12-month state estimates for men were not reliable. Go ahead. Okay, now this slide shows the distribution of the specific types of IPV-related impacts. And this is among victims. So I'm just going to go over a few of the more common impacts. Women are in the purple bars and men are in light blue. So among victims of contact SV, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner, 73% of women, female victims, 30% of male victims reported some type of IPV-related impact. as some examples, 52% of women, 17% of men reporting having PTSD symptoms, 35% of women, 11.5% of men reported being injured, 19% of women, 5.4% of men reporting needing medical care. And in the report, we also include estimates for having become pregnant and contracted an STD, but those are not shown on this slide. Okay, and here are a few examples of state estimates for IPV-related impact. So it's similar to the slide before, but at the state level. We have more data that are presented in the report, and we're able to provide more estimates for female victims than for men due to the sample size. If you look at this slide, the top one is any reported impact, so this is any of those things that we measured, any of the types of impact, and then the ones below are specific examples. You have PTSD, injury, missed a day of school or work.
Okay. So Sharon, now it's time for some questions about intimate partner. There was a question about in the definition about reproductive health or contraceptive coercion. Was that captured in any way?
David, this is Kathleen. It's not captured in the state report. It has been captured in previous reports, and we are planning some journal articles around reproductive coercion. So, the bottom line is that we couldn't include everything in the state report. As it is, it's almost 300 pages, and we were trying to make decisions on what to include based on what we thought would be stable across states. And so, we made the best guesses on what would be stable, and then we pulled together a report based on that. So not everything is in there, and reproductive coercion, unfortunately, is one of the things that wasn't included. But we do plan to do more research and publish some about reproductive coercion. And you can find a little bit about it in our previous IPV special report.
And I am going to put a link to that report right now, so that it's a Nisvs 2010 report on intimate partner violence that does have some of that information. So I want to let people know about that there. So, and then there was a clarifying. Okay, and there was a question about the percentage of total sample that experienced IPV and at least one impact. I'm trying to read the slide, but for the slide, the sample is of those who report IPV at all. These are the percentages of impacts. Okay, I think I now understand the questions. I'm going to go back a slide here. On this one, these are the percentage of people. Can you just get clear? These are the percentage of female victims of IPV who reported any type of reported impact. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes. This is a slide of victims.
Right. This
So
is only
of victims of victims of IPV, victims of contact, sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner. Of those, these in states it ranges from for female victims of 58.9% to 86% reported any reported impact. And there, so great. So that was just a question there to get some clarity of that. And so that's helpful to be able to get. And there was also a question about sexual orientation. Once again, this report did not have sexual orientation in it, but there was another superb report that was done earlier, and so we have, and I did give a link to that. There's another question. Is there data on the use of firearms for coercive control, as the hotline survey showed, or do firearms only show up under extreme violence?
The only data that we have for firearm is just in terms of the impact. Go ahead.
I'm looking to see what questions we have. The use of a gun or
severe violence is what I would say.
The severe physical violence includes the use of a gun, but we don't have, to answer the question, it's not related to our coercive control items. It's captured as part of our severe physical violence measure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions about intimate partner violence? Anne, do you want to actually maybe say this out loud so we can have a conversation instead of having me read it?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Sharon et al. This is Anne again. So what I wrote was that you can probably see that is there are a number of state coalitions that might be surprised to see the data that show either gender symmetry or in some subcategories of intimate partner violence actually higher reports of victimization by men. Can you talk about some of the factors that might contribute to these higher reports in a particular state and any additional contextual information you might be able to provide folks?
So in terms of the differences across states, or are you talking about the similarity across women and men?
Similarity of women and men, and because it is human nature, I think if you also have any thoughts on, and again, maybe cautions about comparing across states.
Okay. So yeah, as we said on the slide earlier, we do recommend caution if you're comparing across states. As Sharon shared, some of the confidence intervals are overlapping, meaning that there may not be, it may not be a meaningful difference across, between two estimates of one state compared to another. Even if they look different, they may not be statistically significantly different. So that it's not a meaningful difference. So it's important to look at the overlapping confidence intervals, and we can say more about that if needed. There are many reasons why states' estimates may vary across the states in the country. It could be in terms of demographics of the given state, or social or economic or cultural characteristics of that state. A lot of things could count for differences in prevalence. It's also important to remind readers that this is the burden within a state in terms of how many victims exist in a state and how much victimization experiences exist among the population of the state. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the victimization occurred in that state. So since we share lifetime as well as 12-month estimates, some of the lifetime experiences could have happened in another state if they lived in another state previously. So it's important to know that as well. So there are many caveats around the state data, and we do recommend caution if you're comparing states or comparing to the national estimate. In terms of some of the similarities between women and men, some of those, if you look across the report, some of those are around the 12-month estimates. Yeah. They tend to be around the 12-month estimates, not as much when you look at the lifetime estimates. There is some previous research that found that victims are less likely to disclose IPV, for example, if it's severe in nature and if they're asked about the last 12 months. So if you look at, one of the reasons we share different estimates is to give a broader picture of what's going on with IPV, the best picture we can provide. And so if you look at the severe physical violence, for example, or the IPV with impact, you see higher numbers for women. And so we suspect that some of the differences around the 12-month estimates have to do for, or could be accounted for, the fact that women may be experiencing more severe violence, physical violence, or other types of violence in intimate partner violence. So the 12-month estimates of IPV may be an underestimate because we know from previous work that victims who are experiencing currently in their relationship are less likely to disclose it. And so it could be underestimating the public health burden of IPV at the 12-month estimates. And because women are more likely to experience severe IPV compared to men, the women's 12-month prevalence estimates may be particularly affected by underreporting.
Thank you. And I noticed that you didn't have a slide, and I was trying to look through the report. You don't report on the sex of the perpetrator in the IPV data. Do we need to rely on the prior reports on that, or what can you say on that?
Yeah, I would rely on the prior reports for that. We apologize that that's not in there. It's hard to pull together a broad, enormous state report like this, and we didn't end up including it here. But I would rely on the previous reports for now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's the question on the gender symmetry and asymmetry, and that was, Kathleen, I think that was very helpful to look at particularly looking at the 12-month prevalence data. And then it's also, I think, really important to be noting the data that around the severe violence and with impact, because we have a question here, and I'm trying to, Johnny, to frame your question in the way you did it around gender symmetry and asymmetry. How do we make sense of the disconnect between what Nisvs data shows and what many years of experience working in the field has taught us to be true? I assume it's largely due to challenges in the methodology. How is CDC assessing this? So I guess I think that there's some places that around the severe and with impact, this is actually aligned with a lot of the experiences from the field around some of the around those forms of violence. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add, Kathleen or Sharon, or Ann for that matter.
Yeah. This is Kathleen. I would just reiterate what Ann was saying in terms of the experiences of victimization. I'm just looking at the question again. I think we're trying, as Ann was saying, we're trying to give more context and understand better what's happening to the extent we can in a survey like Nisvs, which is a 25-minute survey. We have a lot of questions to ask, but we are trying to provide more context by offering the IPV with impact and asking about the impact and the experiences with impact, as well as the severe, looking at severe physical violence separately. So I would just say that it's not, we can't perfectly measure all this in the context of a 25-minute survey, but we're trying to provide more information and detail than we think previous surveys have done.
Right, and I think that there's a question about acknowledging and appreciating looking at the different types of domestic violence in different pieces, and then recognizing this looks at sort of impact and types of violence, but does not look at, someone asked, Tiffany points out about opportunities to discuss the process of resistive or coping violence, and that is not addressed within this.
No, we don't have questions about those aspects.
Okay, great. So any other questions or comments? I want to just give people a chance to be able to do this. We have the great opportunity of having our representatives from CDC have put together this report with robust data, and I do encourage, especially on the IPV, to look at the 2010 IPV report, which has a lot of great context and other aspects that they were unable to include in this on state level, but this brings us with more fuller information. So with that, I'm going to move on to violence experienced as a minor, and I believe this is when, Melissa, you come in?
Yeah, thanks, David. So if you're following along in your reports, the next chapter you'll see highlights violence experienced as a minor. And the Nisvs sample, of course, is made up of adults, but we do ask the age when the violence first occurred. So even though it's a retrospective survey, we can determine the prevalence of violence that was experienced as a child or adolescent. We know from Nisvs and other data sources that violence often begins early in life, which is critically important for prevention because we know that victimization in childhood puts youth at risk for subsequent victimization in adulthood, and then, of course, the numerous psychosocial and health sequelae that follow early and subsequent victimization. So here you can see that in the United States, 7% of women, or 1 in 14, experienced completed rape before turning 18. We only looked here at those who experienced completed rape. Also, about 3% of women experienced stalking before the age of 18. 7% of women in the U.S. experienced completed rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner, and experienced these or other forms of IPV by that same partner before their 18th birthday. An important caveat to keep in mind here is that a small subset of female victims of completed rape could have also experienced attempted made to penetrate or attempted rape by the same perpetrator. And so the age at first could reflect these experiences. So here you can see this figure showing the age distribution among female victims of completed rape. So 41.3%, or about 4 in 10 female victims of completed rape, reported that it occurred before the age of 18, with 30%, or 3 in 10, reporting that it occurred between the ages of 11 and 17, and another 11.2% reporting that it first occurred at age 10 or younger. The caveat, of course, that I gave, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm just realizing that I'm looking at what the chart says, and the red represents what ages?
Yeah, so the red, sorry, I didn't notice that, is 11 to 17-year-olds, so that would be 30.1%. And then there in the blue for 10 and under, it's 11.2%. And then the purple is for 25 plus years, 19.9%. And then the green is 18 to 24-year-olds, 36.5%. I guess in the translation of these slides, the numbers did not convey. We apologize about that.
18 to 24?
Yes.
Okay. You're seeing my not so beautiful writing, but
I am seeing. But basically, you can see there just from the pie graphic that a lot of the victimization first occurs under the age of 18. So overall, again, it was 41.3% of female victims of completed rape, 4 in 10 reported that it occurred before the age of 18. And you could see a majority there being 11 to 17-year-olds. On this slide, and in the report, the reported age is the youngest age reported across all perpetrators. And victims with unknown age are not represented in this figure because, of course, the estimates are not statistically reliable. This next slide that you see is for violence experienced as a minor for men. So for men, 1.3% experienced completed made to penetrate, and a little less than 1% were stalked before the age of 18. 3.7% of men experienced completed made to penetrate, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner, and experienced these or other forms of intimate partner violence by that partner before turning 18. The important caveat here for the men's data is that a small subset of victims of completed made to penetrate could have also experienced attempted made to penetrate or completed or attempted rape by the same perpetrator, and so the age at first could reflect those experiences for a small subset of victims. And now let's see, yep, same problem on this slide, David. Okay, well here, among male victims of completed made to penetrate, 24.3%, about 1 in 4, reported that it occurred before the age of 18. So here you can see the red is the 11 to 17-year-olds with 19.6% of male victims reporting that it occurred between the ages of 11 and 17. And then up there in blue is for age 10 or younger, and that was about 4.7%. And again, that's male victims of completed made to penetrate victimization. Of course, the caveat I gave on the previous slide applies here as well, and the same thing where this slide does not depict victims with unknown age, and the reported age is the youngest age across all perpetrator types.
Okay, let's move to looking at health impacts, and I'll go to questions after these next few sections.
Okay, great. This is Melissa. I'll go ahead and do that slide as well. So as you all know from reviewing the report, in Nisvs, we examined associations between or among 10 specific health conditions and the experience of contact sexual violence or stalking by any perpetrator or physical violence by an intimate partner. So at the national level, those who experience these forms of violence were significantly more likely to report these 8 on the slide here of the 10 health conditions measured in Nisvs compared to those with no history of these forms of violence. And this was true for both men and women. So again, here are the 8 health conditions that did have an association, and there weren't significant differences for diabetes or high blood pressure, which are the additional 2 health conditions that Nisvs assessed. And in this report, we do present these comparisons at the state level.
Okay. There was a question around actually the youth one, and it was, does the report have data on male victims as minors who were penetrated as opposed to made to penetrate? And I believe that would be the completed rape number would be males that experienced penetration?
Correct.
So yes, the study does include male for those who have experienced completed rape would be that category. Great.
I believe so. Again, there's so many reports, but we for sure have the made to penetrate. And of course, like I said, the caveat on the particular slide that I presented was age at first for completed made to penetrate. If they had the same perpetrator who also, attempted rape or completed rape victimization, that could also be captured in that number. But we're checking on your specific question.
Okay, so they are going through.
And one state that was stable that is included in the report.
Right. There's only one state with stable, but there is national data.
Correct.
Okay. Great. So let's talk a little bit about the limitations, then we'll talk about some of the uses of this data.
Okay, so just a few cautionary notes. This is Sharon again. Some estimates were not reliable even with 3 years of data, so that means that we'll need an even larger sample to provide estimates that were not reliable in this report. Second, it's becoming more and more challenging to gather survey data by phone, and this can affect the representativeness of the sample. So recall that the response rate across the 3 years was roughly 33%, but the cooperation rate was over 80%. Next, there are always issues with respect to recall in self-report surveys, such as telescoping, which is a tendency to perceive events in the past as having occurred sooner than they did in reality. So this is an issue that can affect 12-month estimates in particular, but we address this issue by anchoring respondents to the date that was 12 months earlier when they were taking the survey. The estimates provided are likely underestimates of the true prevalence, and there are a number of reasons for this. First, although Nisvs captures a wide range of violence, it isn't feasible to capture all forms of SV, IPV, and stalking. So participants might have experienced violence that wasn't included in the survey. Second, telephone surveys may not include certain populations, such as those living in institutions, prisons, nursing homes, and homeless shelters. And finally, there are potentially issues related to disclosure. For example, victims may only disclose to those they feel closest to or not at all, and some respondents may not feel comfortable talking to an interviewer about their experiences, and some respondents may not feel comfortable disclosing if the perpetrator lives in the home or is nearby.
There was a question earlier, Sharon, about you had the cooperation rates appear very high over of those who start the survey of being able to complete the survey. What do you attribute those your high cooperation rates to?
Well, we haven't done an analysis on that per se, but there's some evidence to show that people are willing to do surveys. They may do them for altruistic reasons. They want to help others. They want to, if they have a sense that it's about prevention, then, which we do say in our introduction, they may feel like that it's something important to do. So our cooperation rate is based on, once they get them on the phone, then they agree to participate. And so can only really hypothesize about this, but altruistic reasons might be one of the reasons. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, this is Kathleen. I would just add female interviewers. We use only female interviewers, and there's been some research showing that that helps, make respondents more comfortable.
Okay. There's a question also about the data, about the API data. Is it possible, you're averaging data, are you able to disaggregate the API data more?
What is the API data?
Asian Pacific Islander. Did you ask if, I guess it probably depends on what, and Susan, I'm not sure if you meant by disaggregating by different types of API communities or in other ways.
We don't think that we have the numbers in order to disaggregate.
And we can't do anything beyond state level, so.
Okay, so at this level it will be only state level and don't have those numbers. Do you plan to continue to collect and report on state level data?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. Well, let's get to uses, which is actually what I always think is really an important piece. And so we're talking about using some of the Nisvs data. And actually this slide alludes to a product that's coming soon from CDC.
Okay, so first, given the potential for ongoing health and service needs, these estimates can help states better understand the burden of violence in their populations. Second, data are helpful in understanding the magnitude of these kinds of violence and the potential impacts and needs of survivors. For example, this report includes many state estimates that we haven't provided in the past, such as violence experienced as a minor. Our state estimates reflect the current residence of respondents, so Nisvs data can provide important information about the proportion of women and men with victimization histories who are currently living in a particular state. Third, data can also be used to examine patterns in sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence, and to evaluate and track the effectiveness of prevention efforts. And finally, state data can be used to identify specific populations for targeting evidence-based prevention approaches that are included in our child abuse and neglect and Stop SV technical packages. These technical packages are available on our website, and the IPV technical package is coming very soon.
And just to let people know that Prevent Connect, working with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, will host a web conference when that technical package gets released.
So looking at the child abuse and neglect technical package, the technical packages in general compile the best available evidence for prevention of child abuse and neglect and sexual violence. These can be used by states and others in the field to guide prevention planning. This slide is a snapshot of the strategies and approaches included in the child abuse and neglect technical package. So we know that starting prevention efforts during childhood can prevent multiple forms of violence from occurring later in life in both adolescence and adulthood. The strategies with the most evidence of effectiveness for preventing child abuse and neglect are a combination of strengthening economic supports for families and changing social norms to be supportive of parents and positive parenting, providing quality care and education, enhancing parenting skills, and then intervening to lessen harms if child abuse and neglect does occur. And it's important to note that violence prevention must continue throughout the lifespan. And here's a snapshot of the strategies and approaches included in the SV technical package. The strategies and approaches outlined in Stop SV emphasize a focus on youth and also span different developmental stages such as adolescence and adulthood, and different levels of the social ecology to focus not only on individual level skills but also relationship and community level approaches to preventing sexual and intimate partner violence. Finally, a comprehensive prevention approach as outlined in these technical packages should involve numerous sectors beyond public health working together. And to conclude, here is where you can find the report and fact sheet. And on the next slide, the link to the infographic.
We'll show a few more slides so that this has put together a very long infographic, and so here's just some of the examples, and we have that information and being able to, and we've already got an appreciation for all the links, so we can get this infographic is here, so there's much information, ending with the prevention messaging here, and there's other resources available too. So Jen Grove, can you talk about some of the resources the National Sexual Violence Resource Center has?
I sure can. Well, we're really excited about the state report, and this is something that folks have been asking for quite a while. And so what we did was we created some talking points, and this is just a very brief resource on the sexual violence data and prevention implications. So we've pulled out some of the key sexual violence statistics, and then we also offer some thoughts about how folks can use this data to inform their prevention efforts. What we love about this is something that was just talked about, was that we just reinforces what we already know about prevention, that it's important that we solve the sexual violence experienced by young people in this report, and we know that prevention programming needs to happen across the lifespan, needs to start early. And so a lot of the information that's provided here just really reinforces what we already know. We also highlight the Stop SV package and the points in that. And so we really hope folks will use the talking points. We have an accompanying blog post that talks a little bit about that as well. And then we just want to offer our resources and our technical assistance. We've heard from a few states who have talked about possibly being interested in creating some talking points for their specific state-level data. If folks would want some information and resources to help with that, also access to any type of research articles, other statistics, we can definitely help with that and can provide that information and those resources to you all. So we're here to help however we can. And would love to know if you're using the talking points, how those are working for you.
Thank you very much. And Ann, can you talk about the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence? And I see some really good questions that I'm going to come to very shortly.
Okay, a lot of the same. NRCDV also has talking points. We're not posting them. We're distributing them through the coalition listserv. We'll send out another copy along with a link to the recording of this webinar, because we heard from a number of coalitions that were not able to attend. So we'll make sure everyone has access to this information. We also agree that the Nisvs findings continue to support our calls for a more comprehensive public policies and funding to support primary prevention and early intervention. So it's a really important tool. This is a lot of information. This is a big report for those of you that have not spent quality time with it yet. So our talking points pull out the key IPV data, also provide some strategies for helping you organize and understand your state-level data. Again, lots of different tables and talking points that are similar to talking points we've had on prior Nisvs reports, and also some framing talking points about some of the state-level data. We also are interested in providing any support folks need, particularly related to the state-level data. So I think that's it. I'll send it back to David.
Thank you very much. So I do want to get to a few more questions that we have. There was a question about I've got a few ones about, is there any future plans about oversampling the Asian Pacific Islander population to be able to do some disaggregation? Because we're dealing with a wide variety of communities under that. So is there any thoughts, or perhaps this is an opportunity to now begin those thoughts?
We don't have specific plans to do that. That is something we could discuss.
And we are thinking that maybe as we accumulate more years of data over time, we'll have more stability for that population. But at this time, we only have what we have so far.
Okay, great. And then does your demographic information include whether victims identified are immigrants or refugees?
We have those data, but they are not analyzed. We don't include that in the report.
Okay, so I'm suspecting that there's interest, and there would be great interest in that, and the 12-month data would that would refer to, does not specify where that took place. So if one were an immigrant or a refugee, that could have taken place either in the United States or in their home country. It just only tells them what their current state of residence is.
So what we have, just to clarify, is we ask where they were born and when they came to the country. We don't have refugee status.
Okay.
Just to clarify.
Okay, great. That's helpful to be able to get here. And then there was another question. Is there a connection between stalking data and attempted or completed homicides?
Okay, I'm trying to understand that question. Where is it?
The question is a question that Chick Dottie asked.
Okay, do you mean between our data set and another data set? Do you mean in this data set? As far as this data set, we don't really collect on whether or not it's a completed or attempted homicide. I mean, there may be a way to look at it in terms of the severe physical violence question where a knife or gun was used on you. There may be a way to connect that if it was the same perpetrator, did the stalking and also did something like that. But, you know, with the numbers, it may be difficult to drill down for that type of analysis. So you potentially have to connect this somehow to another data set, but I don't have suggestions for that.
Okay. And then Chick also points out, and thank you, Chick, for putting the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence has a life course, a report looking at Indian, Pakistani, and Filipino women, and she gives the link to that. So that would be another source to be able to do. There's a question about, is there any data that describes prevalence rates by sexual orientation? And there is a report, previous Nisvs report. We'll put the link again in. I put that earlier into our sexual orientation. There was a previous report that did this by section, that did look at sexual orientation, so that is available in here. And in the data set, the point about stalking is that stalking is a risk factor for homicide, so wanting to think about how to be able to link that. And
right, and someone else had pointed out MVDRS. That would be one way to look at that phenomenon. Just within the MVDRS data set, you might be able to find actual homicides, not attempted, and stalking if collected, if they happen to have that data in the narrative that the person was stalked.
Right. And then we might, and just so people know, National Violent Death Reporting System is, I'm trying to, for those who aren't familiar with acronyms. I think I got that right? Yes, I was doing that. Great. So we only have a couple minutes left, and we didn't get to, I'd love to hear people about how you're looking to use this data and get a sense of what's going to be able to move forward. Someone earlier asked specifically about the stalking data, about prevention. I'd love to sort of end this session with coming up with ways that you'll be able to use the data in your work to be able to support that. We sort of identified why state data would be helpful before, but let's go ahead and do that. We will be, so go ahead and write in the text chat how you plan to be able to use this Nisvs data. We will probably also come to this question to you in your evaluation here to be able to see the utility. I do want to let people know that there's more information about Nisvs, and you can write to CDC at nisvsinfo@cdc.gov. We will also be doing another web conference that will be very similar in content to today for a broader audience. So you can go ahead and let people know if you have constituents and other partners and collaborators that want to be able to attend this or be able to ask questions. We'll have the same guest and actually yet another CDC researcher joining us for that web conference. And so that's going to be on Wednesday, May 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific time. And we still have spaces available for that, so do go ahead and register. So I do want to encourage you to join us on May 17th. So we are at that time where I'm going to actually, unfortunately, need to thank our speakers. I want to thank Sharon Smith, Kathleen Basile, and Melissa Merrick from the CDC for presenting such great depth, and also Ann Menard from the National, for our co-host, Ann Menard from the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, and Jen Grove from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And thank all of you for participating in today's web conference. We will have a recording of this available at a future time. So thank you all. This concludes today's web conference on Nisvs. We thank you all. We'll keep the text chat open for another moment so people can be able to do this. We'll be able to make any last comments. Thank you very much. This concludes the audio portion of today's web conference.